Welcome to the Four Visions Market Podcast, a space built on the principles of integrity and reciprocity. Together, we will engage in thought-provoking conversations about plant medicines, why these plants are coming out of the rainforests, jungles, and mountains after thousands of years, and what it means to be in right relationship with the ancestral wisdom cultures and guardians of these traditions. I'm your host, Mariah Gannessa, founder and director of Four Visions Market. This podcast is the natural evolution in our commitment to providing you, our tribe, with incredible resources to support you on your healing journey through plant medicines. Welcome home. Blessings, Four Visions fam. Today on the show, I am joined by Laura Dawn, host of the Psychedelic Leadership Podcast, visionary leader and plant medicine integration guide for changemakers, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and creators. Through mindset, somatic coaching, and plant medicine integration, Laura inspires leaders to align body, mind, and heart to get unstuck and take centered action in alignment with a deeper sense of purpose to influence meaningful change. She is passionate about helping leaders and teams consciously work with sacred plant medicines to think more creatively and cultivate heart-centered leadership in order to unlock innovative solutions to the complex challenges we collectively face. We had an incredibly invigorating conversation today and covered some juicy topics, such as deconstructing the status quo of our minds and using plant medicine as pattern disruptors, entrepreneurship as a path towards uncovering solutions to the complex problems that we face today, the different lenses that we perceive life through, and how to have awareness of the language around plant medicine culture. FYI, if you are interested in understanding the differences between the words hallucinogen, psychedelic, entheogen, plant medicine, and ecodelic, this episode is definitely for you. We also discussed the current medicalization of plant medicine in Western society and the need to widen the scope of the conversation, as well as what it looks like to find common ground during this time of rapid evolution in the psychedelic space. And much, much more. This episode was one of my favorites thus far and is jam-packed with nuggets of wisdom. So I hope you enjoy, my friends, and thank you for tuning into the conversation.
A quick word from our sponsors before we begin this episode.
When working with powerful plant allies and teachers, we're given a new awareness and a deeper understanding of ourselves, the world around us, and the energies in our lives. One of the most challenging parts of working with plant medicine is integrating the experience. In ceremony, our plant teachers show us the path, but it is then our responsibility to take action in our daily lives. Mushroom microdosing has helped me tremendously in this process, allowing me to keep messages and insights from ceremony in the forefront of my awareness. This is key in the integration process because it helps us to bring the technology of the ancient wisdom we receive through ceremony into lasting, sustainable transformation and change. If you are looking for the right place to source high-quality, ethical, made-in-prayer mushroom microdoses, look no further. Four Visions Market is proud to endorse Connect Chocolate in their 30-day microdose protocol. Visit connectchocolate.life and use the code FVFamily for 10% off your first order. According to a journal published by the National Library of Medicine, individuals who microdose describe a wide variety of psychological benefits, including enhanced creativity, increased energy, improved social ability, sharper focus, stronger analytical thinking, more positive mood, improved memory, and increased mindfulness and general sense of well-being. Connect Chocolate was founded by a member of the Four Visions community, and their mission is to cultivate kinship with earth and spirit. This 30-day at-home treatment will take you on a journey to support your emotional, spiritual, and mental well-being. Go to connectchocolate.life or visit the link in our show notes. And remember to use the code FVFamily for 10% off your first order. Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us. I hear those beautiful birds in the background there, and I'm really excited to connect with you and drop in for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much, Mariah. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Same here. I have been following your journey for many years, actually, and have been inspired by the work that you are doing and the way in which you show up as a leader in the plant medicine space, and your courage and fearlessness in navigating uncharted territory. So for me, it's a great honor to meet you and to have this conversation. And I'm really looking forward to just getting right into it. That being said, I'm not sure if our listeners are familiar with you and your platform. So I would love if you could introduce yourself a little bit to them and share with us a little bit about your journey and how you found yourself in the life that you're living and how everything unfolded for you to be here today.
Oh, thank you for that invitation. And gosh, that story could probably easily take up the full 90 minutes or a full hour. So I'll just, hit the bullet points. I focus at the intersection of psychedelics and creativity, more specifically creative cognition, within the framework of leadership development, supporting people, primarily entrepreneurs and thought leaders and leaders in the psychedelic space and also beyond, to orient themselves in a way that is leading from the heart and finding active solutions to the very complex challenges that we face. And we face a lot of challenges, and it's easy to just get so overwhelmed, and just want to give up in the face of climate change and capitalistic culture and models that we know aren't serving us, but we know also that capitalism is probably not going anywhere anytime soon. So what is the emergent change that we can help contribute towards? And I do really genuinely in my heart believe that actually the psychedelic experience, and I use the word psychedelics interchangeably with plant medicine experience, and actually the words that we use really do matter, and there's so much to unpack around that, but whatever you want to call that altered state of experience, that embedded in that experience are the skill sets and the mindsets to navigate this new era that we're really stepping into, that has been coined the fourth industrial revolution, marked by rapid change in disruptive technologies like AI. So it's not about, inspiring people to elevate their cognition so that we can adapt and be resilient in the face of accelerating change, but asking these deeper questions of, what are we adapting to? Like, if the bar is getting higher, are we trying to, improve our performance? I talk a lot about, high performance. I work with a lot of peak performers in, the leadership space, but reevaluating our fundamental values and re-looking at, do we want to keep, ever adapting to reach that high bar of quote unquote success, and actually looking at how much do we want to be doing, and how much do we, want to be living up to, and what is our definition of success, and what are the models that we're applying to our own business as entrepreneurs. And treading through all of those conversations with an enormous amount of humility around what we don't know that we don't know. And so just very briefly, I have been exploring altered states of consciousness for 25 years now. So I kind of like to joke that psychedelics and plant medicines and fungi raised me and forged me into who I am today. And I simultaneously on that track have been on a parallel track, an entrepreneur my entire life. I am a third generation entrepreneur at this point. And, and so I'm really an advocate for not just stepping out of the status quo, but really evaluating the deconstruction of the status quo of our mind and our thinking, and looking at these medicines as powerful pattern disruptors, pattern interrupters, so that we're not just, going about it, business as usual, but redefining what business can look like, and actually putting a stake in the ground and saying that business is not a dirty word for the new age spiritual community. Being an entrepreneur is a valuable path towards finding and uncovering solutions to the complex challenges that we face. And so I'm speaking a lot more about my process that I've been developing over the past, 10, 15 years of how I actually weave medicines into my creative process, and illuminating that there are many frames through which we can engage with psychedelics, and there are many contexts for which we can engage with them, and that a ceremonial context in a group with ayahuasca, of the various lineages, multitude of lineages that engage with these medicines, is a different frame than working with LSD on a solo journey outside in nature, and that's very different than the psychedelic therapy frame, which is, I'll just emphasize, the predominant narrative that is paving the pathway for the reemergence of psychedelics into Western culture. And the indigenous frame lens is very different than the Western lens, and they all have embedded so many hidden assumptions and beliefs that, inform our experience and the outcomes of those experiences and the integration and preparation of those experiences. And I hope that we will still, as a culture, develop new ways and new terms for engaging with the multitude and multidimensional aspects of these medicines at large. And so, that's a large framing tee up for the whole conversation. But, that's really sort of my lens and my recent academic background and my academic training that has really been fun actually to apply to the work that I do was a completion of a Master of Science in Creativity Studies and Change Leadership. And I focus my degree on the intersection between psychedelic compounds and creative cognition for leadership development. And it's just been a joy to wear all the hats. I love the language of prayer, and I also love the language of science. And I think right now, as leaders in this space, we really urgently need to widen the conversation and become aware of the implications of the language and the hidden lens, through which we perceive psychedelic medicines and sacred plant medicines.
Beautiful. That's so amazing to hear just a little bit more about the approach that you take and your perspective. And it was a beautiful framing. There's so many different seeds that you planted that I'm looking forward to expanding more in this conversation. I would like to start, and this might not be where you think that we are going to start, but you mentioned something really interesting, and I think it's really worth highlighting and bringing to light here in regards to the way in which the indigenous framework of the use of the medicines, and then the psychedelic therapy framework versus recreational use of plant medicine. And they are such different approaches. And I am really interested in hearing your observations and your thoughts about both how they are different and then how they can weave together for this new era that we are entering into with plant medicine. Because, for us with Four Visions, we're very much rooted in preserving ancestral wisdom. So our work is really focused on the ancestral lineages because we believe that these cultures are the original carriers of these medicines, and we want to bring this approach into the forefront of people's consciousness. But of course, we are aware of the evolution of all of these other ways and approaches. And as a Western society, I also and we as a company recognize that we are different. We're experiencing these tools in a completely different way than people who are from these traditional cultures and live deep in the jungle and participate with these medicines as part of their inheritance, right? So I'm very curious to hear you elaborate a little bit more on this topic, your thoughts and insights.
Oh gosh. And it's such a juicy topic. We're in this multi-dimensional soup of culture and perception and narratives that are embedded in culture. And I think the real core takeaway that I feel is worth emphasizing is that there's no right way. And the parable that I really like to emphasize is the parable around the three blind men with the elephant. And it's so interesting and I think that this is helpful to sort of put on the table as a parable, as a guiding analogy here, that it's like three blind men come up to an elephant for the first time ever, and they're trying to figure out what this thing is. And one blind man is holding the tail and feeling like the end of the tail and the fur on the tail. And another blind man is holding the tusk and describing the experience of the elephant by feeling and exploring the tusk. And the other blind man is exploring the elephant by holding one of the feet of the elephant, and we could go on with the tusk or the long nose that an elephant has by which it eats. And so there's a lot that can be said. And each of the blind men is making a case for, no, this is the way it is. It's this way. This is how we should be talking about it because this is my experience of it. And they actually get into such a large argument and debate over it that they go their separate ways after being friends for a very, very long time. So, and I think that that's a great analogy because these are such complex, whether we call it a tool that really influences the frame that we're talking about, a sacrament, a medicine, a drug. They're very similar compounds. LSD is similar but different to psilocybin. Fungi has been growing all over the world, used in a lot of different contexts. The Mazatec lineage has been developing that skill set for a long time. And it's different than DMT and Bufo, different than 5-MeO DMT and synthetic versions, different than Iboga. There are a lot of plants that are in the quote unquote classical psychedelic camp, but actually their compounds are slightly different. And I was having a conversation with a friend the other day that there are functional attributes that make them functional for different experiences, that we can draw upon those functional attributes and apply them in different ways. And so I think right now we're at a very important juncture in the conversation where we have to become aware. I'm actually doing a whole solo episode on this. It's like the first entire chapter of the book that I'm writing. The primary narrative that's paving the pathway for psychedelics into Western culture is medicalization and the narrative of psychedelic therapy. And I'm not saying that that's wrong or bad. I'm actually saying that that's humane. We're facing a mental health crisis. But if we don't widen the scope of the conversation and we collapse it and say this is the way, and that way is actually informing policy, it's informing regulation, legalities, it has far-reaching consequences. And there's a lot that can be said about like the Western lens and the cultural setting, which is a fundamental part of set and setting. The worldview, we're in a monophasic worldview. Indigenous cultures tend to take a polyphasic worldview. There's so many different ways that we can point to the differences in culture and how that influences the narrative. LSD is sort of being cast aside as a synthetic medicine or drug in the light of our generation in the West that is very, advocates for plant medicine. And I'm not saying any of it is right or wrong, good or bad, but that there are hidden assumptions and beliefs that encourage us to fight for what we believe in and fight against other camps in the psychedelic space, plant medicine space, when I really think the message here is to broaden our view and incorporate a more of a narrative that every lineage is beautiful, and that just because, there is one lineage that's been working with it for many, many thousands of years, it doesn't disregard the evolution of how we can now apply these different medicines in different contexts in different ways to ultimately help us as human beings make sense of what it means to be alive. Because I think the core denominator of the multitude and the beauty and like the rainbow spectrum of the use of the cultures and rituals and applications is that these are profound tools for sense making, and that we as human beings, regardless of what culture we're in, whether it's a Shipibo culture, whether we're in Brazil, whether we're in Ecuador, whether we're in the UK, we all have a fundamental need to make sense of what it means to be alive and to make sense of this reality that we're living in. And so I'm really focused on celebrating the diversity and the uniqueness and the individual aspects, and celebrating our differences and celebrating our shared common humanity. And when you're talking with someone who has a different worldview, to not judge it and say, actually, you can only work with it within a perspective of lineage. I actually don't believe that to be true. I celebrate the creativity of the human desire to create ritual, and that we can actually keep evolving, and that there's a bigger encompassing narrative here. And so I'm not saying, oh, I disagree with the medicalized model, or I disagree with an indigenous stance that we need to carry on lineages. I'm saying let's embrace it all. And I offer more than just the medicalization, the therapy box, the recreational box, and the lineage box. And I don't want to put it in a box, but that camp will say, and the diversity, it's even just our Western mentality to want to collapse, indigenous lineages into one camp when there's so many different ways. And I'm proposing, hey, we could also see psychedelics and sacred plant medicines as entheogens. And that the entheogens is actually another frame. And that when we look at it through that frame, it actually changes how we engage, how we think about set and setting, how we think about integration and preparation. And I hope that we still apply new words, new ways, new frameworks, new protocols as we evolve to these changing times.
Beautiful. Yes, I definitely see where you're coming from with all of that. And there's a lot of resonance there. I think that I feel that there's danger when we approach any one of these models without taking into account the other experiences that are evolving and being created through the different evolution of these plant medicines in the space, right? So when this is like for life in general, right? When we shut ourselves off from something, then we're just not experiencing the totality of what it is. So for me, there's danger in the medicalized model that continues forward in the trajectory it's going without a greater understanding of the origin of these plants and the stories and the culture behind it, right? And so my question is kind of what do you see as the way forward? And I think you mentioned it a little bit, but like in more concrete terms of as far as, policy being written and the people that are currently involved with stewarding and bringing forth this medicalized model. I'm not sure if you can share a little bit of the current status and then what you see as different ways in which we could improve this evolutionary process.
Right. Well, then we have to really start talking about, okay, we need to define what we're talking about regarding quote unquote problem, define the challenges. We're not all on the same page around what our shared values are for humanity right now. So this is really tricky. Having a systems view is really helpful. People listening, having a language around sense making is really helpful. Daniel Schmachenberger talks a lot about this. Alex Beiner, Eric Davis has chimed in a lot around, the lens and the context. And I think, more than anything, it's like the concrete thing I'll say is number one, learn how to train your nervous system to engage in dialogue so that you can actually be a leader of the new era and not collapse complexity into black or white thinking that says it has to be this way. And as soon as I have conversations with people who say it has to be this way and it collapses into that, I bow and say, okay, that's an impasse now. You've created an impasse that prevents solution-oriented thinking. And when people tell me, okay, I'm going to put a very vulnerable, exposing example on the table, for example, and this is not easy for me to share. I live in Costa Rica full time. I have some people who express to me that is a perpetuation of white colonialism in indigenous culture. And I appreciate that perspective. So I'm not saying, no, you're wrong. We all deserve to be here. I'm saying it's much more complex than that. And that actually the indigenous tribes, the Baruka tribes, did live in this area. But since me stepping in and stewarding this land, there was something else that happened. And I'm actually trying to track the history of this land so that I can understand more. But there was a transition from the indigenous tribes of the Baruka tribes to an acquiring of this land by a local Tico population that they don't consider themselves indigenous. It's very complicated and it's very complex. Local Ticos don't consider themselves indigenous. They're indigenous to Costa Rica, but they acquired land from the Baruka indigenous community that now is no longer here. And I find that very sad that they're no longer here. And I'm learning more. I'm in an active place of I want to understand, I want to learn. And I actually recognize that my Western worldview has hidden assumptions. They're hidden. So I can't see the full picture. But that actually goes for every culture and every person on this planet. And where it gets more complicated is that a lot of the local Tico population here, not everyone, so I don't want to generalize, they're on this land. They were cattle farming that degrades the land. It was polluting, playing a large role in the pollution of the waters. And they were spraying chemicals and Roundup. And part of the mission of buying this land was to help protect these 2 miles of water, to reforest it, and to put it back into a regenerative model that the local people who had been stewarding this land for 30 years prior to us were not of that educational mindset for many, many, many reasons. It's incredibly complex. So sometimes I feel like I need to overcome the racial question and conversation and try to say, okay, well, fundamentally, I feel like I am on Team Gaia and I really want to play my part in doing what I can to help keep our waters clean for people to drink, and so these are multidimensional issues and I'm still learning and we're still looking at, okay, well, what kind of model now can we put this land in a trust so that other people can benefit? And we're still in the very early phases of that.
Very beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And it is an incredible example of all of the many different layers and complexities. And when we take something at face value, we're really limiting ourselves so much. And we're ignorant in our own ignorance when we look at it from, just what we see on the surface. So I love that example. And it's a really beautiful one. You talk a lot about this concept of, the frames of reference for how we talk about plant medicine, psychedelics, how we talk about life, right? It's like this vocabulary that we use. I would love to get more into that with you. But I want to ask you if you can take us from what you would consider the beginning, the introduction for someone who maybe isn't familiar that there's this concept of different words and vocabulary that we can utilize to talk about these tools and these spaces.
Okay, great. Let's start from a 101 perspective. And then I actually want to add another example that I think is much more widely applicable as a core takeaway to the last question that you asked.
Okay, great.
So let me start with the 101. I collapsed that last question and gave a very personal example, which was not easy for me to do, but actually I feel like it's in everyone's best interest if I offer a larger example. But let me give this
We can
framing
stay there if you want. Whatever
okay,
feels best
okay,
for
let's
you.
do that. And then we'll come back into what is a frame of reference? Okay. So the other example I was going to give was because you also asked about like the policy and legalities. And so another area that's like very complex, and I'm not going to claim that I hold the full view of the complexity. None of us hold the full picture for anything. And I think that also points to frame of reference, which we'll get to in a second. But the conversation around decrim nature, this is another perfect example. On one hand, we can say and make a very compelling case that nature should be decriminalized. And I understand that perspective, and I support people who feel the need to, advocate for that. Now, when we start pulling back layers, so on one hand, mushrooms, okay, they grow all over the world. They've been embedded in cultures for many thousands of years in many different cultures. So should fungi be decriminalized because it affects our state of mind in ways that, the government doesn't want to support? I'm a believer in cognitive liberty. But even that is complicated. But coming to this issue about decrim, so taking the conversation around mushrooms, that's one thing. Ayahuasca becomes much more complicated. And then when we look at other examples like peyote, for example, where we have a large group of people of the Native American tradition saying to our Western culture, please do not decriminalize our medicine. We don't have enough access to medicine that we use as a sacred sacrament that we've been using within a religious context for many, I don't want to claim I know how many years, but for generations upon generations. Then as a different lens that we can apply to this conversation around decrim to encompass and broaden our scope of the multi-complexity and the nuance of this conversation, I say, okay, well, then as a good psychedelic citizen, I am going to choose to engage with a medicine that is more available and that is growing more abundantly. So I'm putting the sustainability lens on it, and I'm putting the regenerative lens on it, because yes, I could say, and make the argument that like I have right as a human being to consume any plant, cacti, or fungi that I want, and that is my right. Yes, that's true. It is my right. I do believe that. And yet, I am an empathic human being who says, wow, that Native American elder is asking me to please refrain from consuming peyote. And so as like a good human, I'm going to be like, okay, I don't need to consume that. I can consume something else, and let me leave it for you. And that maybe we want to broaden the conversation of decrim within that broader scope to say, maybe we don't. Maybe there's ramifications of decriminalization that we're not paying attention to. And we need to invite a diversity of perspectives to the table that include traditional knowledge holders, that don't also exclude institutions or government or policy, but that bring everyone to the table, and that we learn to listen, and that we put the frame of, access and benefit sharing, reciprocity, sustainability, and climate change, and all of these other hats, because it's not one dimensional. Social media encourages outrage and conflict because you can only fit an argument in 150 words. So you can never offer the full spectrum of what a topic actually is. And we need to remember that when we're talking about these things.
Beautifully said. And I'm really just soaking that all in and really hoping that our listeners can really receive like the gravitas of that example specifically, because I feel like it's an incredible demonstration of the ways in which when we approach these conversations, first we start with this acknowledgement of I never know the whole picture. Like you shared at the beginning, I feel like this is a really just a good check mark off our list when we're engaging in these conversations or engaging in these processes of evolution within our communities in this space. And then when we come from that place and really, come from this place of the unity first and foremost, right? Like seeking solution, right? Seeking solution rather than staying so focused on our own perspective and so attached to our own belief system that like you said, that it's only black and white and that there's no middle ground, because that is so limiting for us and it's not the way forward, right? And now for our weekly giveaway. Today's lucky winner is going to be winning a set of our women and men's vitality teas. Enjoy one blend for yourself and gift the other to a partner or friend. As we move into fall, our vitality teas are the perfect way to nourish and support the body in the changing seasons. Handcrafted with, of course, 100% organic herbs, flowers, and medicinal roots. Each blend is thoughtfully designed and intentionally crafted to help your mind, body, and spirit achieve the highest states of youth and vitality. Our winner this week is Choose 10, who writes, "Four Visions is the best. I already fell in love with the Four Visions market, so when they came out with a podcast, I knew I had to give it a listen. Just like the products they sell, the podcast episodes are done with such integrity and wisdom. Thank you, Mariah, for all that you do. You can learn so much about plant medicine, indigenous ways of life, and ways to heal yourself from these episodes. So go give it a listen and get inspired." Wow. Thank you so much, Choose 10. These reflections are inspiring me and the entire team to keep going and continuing to do the work that we do. So deepest gratitude from the bottom of all of our hearts here on the Four Visions team. And congratulations on winning this week's giveaway. Please email us at thepodcast@fourvisionsmarket.com to coordinate the delivery of your package of our Vitality Tea set. To enter the ongoing raffle, all you need to do is write an honest review of our podcast, either on iTunes or YouTube. Sorry, Spotify, Google Podcast users, not able to write written reviews there. So please head over to iTunes or YouTube to leave your written review. And that's it. Each week, we'll announce a new winner, read their honest review on the show, and give away some awesome products. And now back to today's episode. You've mentioned this concept of like this new paradigm that we're coming into within the plant medicine space, and I do feel like this time is so much different than our parents' generation of use with the plant medicine, psychedelics, and anything that we've seen before. We're living in a very exciting, monumental time. And if we utilize this time to seek solution, if we utilize this time to bring together a future and work together to create a future for our children, for the next generations, for all children, right? So for all the different communities that are impacted by these decision makings and seeing the intersection, then there's beauty on the other side, right? And so that is kind of like the reminder that we have to keep returning to in these conversations, and really, remembering that this is a gift. This is a blessing to be here, talking about having these conversations, talking about these topics. And just in that, there should be hope in our hearts and joy and gratitude to be engaging in these conversations. And I think when we come from that place, then, there is that solution, and we can work together to find the way forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. And similar to the parable of the elephant, it's like, that's what understanding our frame of reference is all about. It's like imagining that you wear a pair of glasses and you've been wearing them for so long, you just forgot that they're on your face. And when you take them off, you see that they have a particular frame, and they're unique to you, but they have shared similarities with your family that you come from and the culture and the society that you live in. And those frames were developed to be adapted to help you survive. And they're tinted based on all of your past experience and the education that you have, and, and they're embedded with your beliefs and the words that you use and the concepts that you create to define reality. And so we just need to remember that every time we are opening our eyes and looking around us, it is through a perceptual lens, and everyone's lens is going to be different. And there are clusters of people who share similarities, like I said, based on culture, based on communities, based on certain attributes to our upbringing, socio-demographic aspects, the family that we grew up in, the kind of education that we had. But if we start with a starting point, and we can acknowledge that your frame is going to be different than my frame, and that's okay. And that's actually, it's a gift, and that's how we learn and we grow, instead of saying it's got to be this way.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So elaborating on this frame of reference, I'm curious if you could explain a little bit, more about that. And then also, give us some examples with vocabulary. You mentioned that I think you lean more towards the psychedelics versus plant medicine. I'm very curious on that, and maybe some other examples that will help us to conceptualize and integrate this concept a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I had a really hard time actually deciding about my brand name, whether I wanted to go with sacred plant medicines or with psychedelics, because I actually feel very like both of them, really speak to a language that I love. And I have a hat in academia and science, and I love science. And I also am very intuitive and very open to different ways of knowing and mystical experiences. So part of the work that I do is actually just an extension of a mindset that I love, that bridges different realities, and so, and I feel like what I expressed with the lens and the glasses, like that really gives a good example for people around what a frame of reference actually is. And essentially it's really this set of parameters that define our mental schema, and that's it. And the lens and the tint is a good example, because what is embedded in that frame are our beliefs about what we believe to be true and what we value. And it's so shaped by culture and worldview. And so the indigenous cultural worldview is different than a Western cultural worldview. It is. And unfortunately, there is so much in the Western cultural worldview and the capitalistic model that has been this, zero-sum race to the bottom game, where we are now, really deteriorating our environment in such a way that it's becoming inhabitable to humans. And so I understand, like, there, but we need to move, I think, beyond that and celebrate our differences as well. And again, it's really about actually being able to develop the metacognitive awareness that you're holding a frame. And when you develop that awareness and you can actually pause and say, wow, being like a fish underwater that forgets it's underwater. But when you can say, I'm actually holding up a lens right now and it's coloring my view of reality, that is enormously empowering for all of us. And it's beneficial for conflict resolution, but it's also really beneficial for leadership development and for training creative cognition. And so, an example is me handing you a substance and saying, this is a psychotomimetic, which is a word that was given to LSD in the early days when we didn't know a lot about it, and this is really what like my point is around in the chapter of the book that I'm writing, but it's the frame of, okay, this is a psychedelic therapy frame. It's medicalized, and that's the narrative paving the way in the West. And then we have, the evolution of words that we've given to psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD and DMT, from psychotomimetic to entheogen to that was a response to the sort of like not like throwing hallucinogen under the table, but a lot of people actually were like, I don't like that word hallucinogen because it implies a hallucination, and that is not really what's going on. And so let's develop a new word, which was entheogen, coming to know God within. And then, and so it's beautiful to see. And now the latest kid on the block is ecodelics. I don't know if you've been noticing, a lot more people using the term ecodelics, which implies that the fundamental experience of sacred plant medicines or psychedelics changes our relationship to understanding our inherent connection to this earth. And that immediately resonates for me because I've been living outside for almost 20 years and journeying with medicines for 25 years. Even the word medicine, when you look at the word medicine through a Western lens, it's different than through a indigenous lens. And, plantas sagradas, that was sacred plant medicines. 6 months ago, I was at a conference that was a private gathering talking about, protocols that we can implement into Costa Rica for, a protocol for integration of ayahuasca. And someone said, well, we need to make sure that this is, indigenous aligned protocols. And I'm like, yes, and we have such a different worldview that applying integration, like they don't actually think about integration. They don't need integration.
That's not part of their...
Yeah, so like going to an ayahuasca ceremony as someone who lives in a city and then going to the jungle, that's very hard to integrate back into a Western worldview. So, is it right or wrong for, like us to adapt that medicine for a Western culture, in which case that people label that as appropriation right now? So it's like, it's really tricky. And I'm not saying I know the answers, and what I'm also saying is proposing other words, psychedelics. This is a great example. And I'm using psychedelic and sacred plant medicine interchangeably because to me, there's a lot of overlap there. Altered states of consciousness is also a very different frame too, but it speaks to the larger umbrella of what we're talking about. But ayahuasca and psychedelics have been also called empathogens. And then because we started discovering, wow, they're really helpful for generating empathy, then all of a sudden someone said, well, let's apply this medicine to help support conflict resolution in the East. And let's bring ayahuasca ceremonies to the Middle East to support the healing of the division between Israelis and Palestinians. I mean, that is remarkable. And that's a perfect example. We put a label on it. We see what it is through that lens. And then it informs how we think about set and setting and application of use and preparation and integration. I mean, that's a perfect example. And so what I'm also saying is like, actually, when we give, I consider psychedelics and sacred plant medicines to also be entheogens. That was a term coined by Thomas Roberts. And I love that term. And as soon as we give it that label, also changes how we think about working with them. And it also opens up a doorway of possibility and allows us to break free from conventional thinking, or it needs to be this way thinking, where someone might say to me, that is blasphemy to be applying that language to, let's say, ayahuasca, for example, and shame on you. And who the fuck do you think you are? And that's one way and one perspective. And I think we're evolving, and actually we are facing very complex challenges, and this is an all hands on deck situation. So I'm actually just going to put that annoying criticism aside for now and actually do the work that is in my capacity to do to help support people in finding creative solutions to the extremely complex challenges that we face. And so thank you very much, but I'm going to keep doing this because actually we are about to experience a full systems collapse. And so let's just do what we can and do what we know is ours to do. And it's not rooted in, I just had my first ayahuasca journey. I'm going to launch the largest psychedelic psychedelic venture in the space, it's like, hey, I don't know what I don't know. I've also been journeying with a range of medicines in depth for 25 years. And I've been cultivating a practice that has been very valuable for my life. And I really feel inspired to share it with people to the degree that people feel like this might be for them. And it might have something in it for them. And it's not the only way. And let's celebrate all the doorways, what lies behind mystery door number 1 through a million.
Super fascinating. Thank you so much for that beautiful response and explanation. Just have my wheels churning with all the different possibilities, and it really is. It's like, let's expand. Let's think about this in the way that maybe we're not conditioned to think about things, because where we're at, what is being asked of us and right now is to really step up, and that's going to require getting out of that comfort zone of what we feel is the truth and what we have believed with all of our heart and might that is the truth for so long that we don't even know that there might be a sliver of an opening that takes us to this greater understanding of possibilities and perspectives. And just really loving this conversation and resonating so much with all of these wonderful topics, and super cool that this is what you are devoting your life to, getting a little taste of who Laura is and your passions, and really beautiful, and really just love all the work that you're doing and really feeling it come through and how you share and how excited you are about, solving these problems or bringing solution to these different elements that need answers. And it's like, you really just got me pumped up there, all hands on deck. Okay, let's go. Let's do it. Right. Because it's true. We need it. We need all the support we can get. We need to unify. There's no other option, right? It's like, there really is no other way.
Yeah. And, I appreciate that so much. And sometimes, because I am also embedded in a daily reality where I have no walls, I'm literally living in the middle of a wildlife highway where I have wildlife that walks through my house. I've been living off grid for many years, and it's become embedded now in my perceptual lens. And so, yes, sometimes I do forget that the maladies of Western culture and just like how much time people, spend watching television and all the things, And so I want to emphasize that, like, the understanding of the original principles from Indigenous culture is so important. It's, the understanding of what it means to live in harmony with our environment, I think, is a fundamental starting point to understanding what it means to be in right relationship with life. And so
100%.
Everything that I'm saying is really embedded in not just a conceptual understanding of that, but for 10 years, I lived with only water catchment, and that does something to you in terms of how you relate to your environment and nature and consumption and how much energy you're pulling from your environment, and what that means when you need to make adjustments based on the fact that it didn't rain for 3 months. And that's an aspect of Indigenous worldview that I feel like is so lacking in Western culture, because we're so removed from our food supply. We're so removed from our environment, from water supply, from like, where does your shit go when you flush the toilet? So there's such a strong disconnect. And so, that frame, I think, is also really helpful to put on everything that we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so much more I could say about it, but I feel like that concept of, right relationship with our environment, right relationship with how we are living on this earth, and we're growing our own food here, and we're not there yet in terms of like all of our food needs are being supported, but like, that's the direction I'm going in. That's what I'm trying to do. And then, this whole other like conversation and topic of reciprocity as like, this like shamey conversation that happens in the West, where it's like, actually, I just want to be a good, plant medicine member of the community. And like, because I love working with these medicines that have changed my life, then of course I want to support the cultures who have a deep root in knowledge. Like I say, navigating altered states of consciousness is a skill set that you can develop, and imagine being of a lineage that's developed it for lifetime after lifetime, generation after generation. Their roots run deep. Like, I have enormous respect for that, and there's a lot of cultures in our community, because when you drink ayahuasca, for example, for the first time, you become part of a global ayahuasca community. And there's a lot of members on our community block who are saying, hey guys, we need support. We are the ones defending the Amazon rainforest, which we all rely on, and we need your help. And so I'm less of the conversation of reciprocity and more as a conversation of, actually, I want to support you because like, that's a good thing to do as like a human being who wants to support other members of our community.
It's born within your heart to do so rather than it being, expected. And there's that awkward pressure that's put on us.
Yeah. Yeah. And just reframing that. And then also having the understanding that actually just throwing money at a situation, especially in an Indigenous community, can actually cause more harm than good. And having a Western mentality of like, oh, I know what to do. They just need money. So I'm just going to go give it to them. And, I'm going to relieve myself of the like eternal guilt and shame that I feel for being a white person. And so, it's really tricky. It's really complicated. And sometimes actually adding money into an Indigenous community is not the most helpful thing to do. And that there are other ways, and actually being invited into the conversation is really the first place to start, and avoiding our footprint and minimizing tourism of these medicines. Because when you look at, for example, what's happened in Oaxaca and the psilocybin tourism or the sacred mushroom tourism there has had a really far-reaching impact on their community. So we need to be mindful of how we move and start thinking 3 steps ahead and start embodying some of those principles, of the original principles that are not, indigenous, they're actually human, like to live in right relationship and to be in harmony. And that's what it means to be human. And you can actually look at examples of those original principles across all cultures, from Polynesia to Hawaii and Ho'oponopono and forgiveness practices. That's what it means to be a good human, to live with forgiveness and and all of these aspects. It's our shared common humanity, and we're also all different, living with different worldviews. And what a beautiful world that's created. Biodiversity, cultural diversity, and I also advocate for cognitive diversity. And that's the other, the whole other aspect of what I'm doing with psychedelic or sacred plant medicines and creative cognition. And actually part of the reason I use psychedelics more in the framing of psychedelics and creative cognition is more within the psychedelic frame and not the sacred plant medicine frame, because there's more flack that I can get because if I put it under a sacred plant medicine frame as, a person in the West. So, and it's not easy, because I love sacred plant medicines in that framing too. And a lot of the medicines I work with are plant medicines, but I did choose to intentionally go with the psychedelic language because I am Western.
Very interesting. Beautiful. I'm so happy that, you brought this up, because that was where I was going to go next. And, we talk a lot on this podcast about different concepts of reciprocity and what it means to really, show up in service and in wanting to help, and how we can go about doing that in the right way. And so I love what you share about, sometimes money is not the first thing that's needed, and to really be able to come with humility and listen first. And that's really how we can be in service to any community or any group of people, rather than not just obviously Indigenous tribes, right? Like first we have to orient ourselves, present ourselves, get to know the needs needs of the people, of the community, that what their dreams are to achieve, and then how we can support that, right? And so that even just coming and throwing a bunch of money at a situation or at an initiative, that is very, Western thinking from the get-go, that we think that, the money is going to solve everything. And so we really do, with this concept of reciprocity, of being in right relationship, have to start broadening the scope and start like asking deeper questions of, what medicines are part of my practice first, and where are these medicines coming from, and what is like the natural call from within my heart that the medicines are literally helping me to cultivate and get deeper in connection with, and what is being asked of me to support the communities or the lands, the nature that is providing me with these tools, right? So I think it's also like a really personal question, and I think the best way to approach it is really first checking in with, what is being asked of me, because when we work with these tools without any awareness, without taking the time to check in and ask, then obviously we're like shutting off the door. But if we actually tune in and ask the question, what is being asked of me through these medicines, and what is being asked of me to be in right relationship to the traditions that are providing me these medicines, that answer will come, and there will be a clear direction for each one of us to take. But it's not coming from, like you said, this place of shaming. It's truly coming from this natural evolution and this answer that's coming from deep within us. And that is so much more powerful when we're talking about, making change, having impact, that an action that comes from that place rather than what we think is expected of us is really has so much more potency when it comes to, changing the evolution and the organization of the game that we're in. So I really feel passionate about this conversation of the reciprocity element. And you mentioned something that I felt was really interesting at the beginning. And you said that you don't necessarily even like to use the word reciprocity. And I know that you also do a lot of coaching with women and all people in business, and how to structure and guide entrepreneurs into building platforms and building their offerings in a way that factors in this element of what it needs to be in sacred commerce. And this is also a big pillar of both Four Visions and also the theme that we talk a lot about on the podcast, this concept of sacred commerce and what it means to be leaders in entrepreneurship, leaders in the business world, and in showing a new model, right? Like literally exemplifying this new model. Like you said, capitalism isn't going anywhere, but this new way is emerging of what it means to share our gifts and be compensated for them, to live in abundance, to partake in commerce in a way that doesn't cause harm, right? And so I'm very interested to hear you talk a little bit more about this, and also about the work that you do with leaders in this space.
Thank you. And so sorry for the background noise. We're doing a little bit of construction on our casita. So if you can hear that, that's what's going on here. So I guess that question is a little twofold. Words carry meaning, and I'm a self-proclaimed word nerd. I love looking at the lineage of words and how they evolve over time. And also when we look at reciprocity, like the current definition of it and as it pertains to cultural reciprocity is that there is mutual consent. And then all of a sudden, this gets really tricky. In one perspective, people hold the view that we in the West should not be drinking ayahuasca because Indigenous people have not given their consent to do so. And that's hard to pull apart the threads of that. Which Indigenous culture, which lineage, and like whose right is it to say, yes, one can or can't? If you look at it, from the perspective of like ayahuasca, like if I was that medicine, the spirit of that medicine, I don't think I'd discriminate against one culture or another. Like and so I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. And that in many ways I understand that perspective. So I just approach it from a different frame, which is more in alignment with the Nagoya protocol, which is much more around access and benefit sharing. And The Nagoya Protocol is over 30 years old, and they've put a lot of time and thought in, and its multicultural contribution to that protocol. And that really highlights what it means that if you are a person or a company benefiting off of heritage, we'll call it a molecule, then actually it's really best for you to support and give back and benefit, reshare those benefits that you received with traditional knowledge holders of that medicine outside of the framework of mutual consent, because that's really tricky to pull apart the threads of that. Like, does the Mazatec culture need to give consent to the world to use a medicine that grows all over the world? That's maybe even a better example of that. I'm sorry for that background noise.
It's okay.
But I'll just say that, again, it comes back around to this notion that we want to be good humans and we want to benefit other people. Okay. I have a whole team of guys working here. So my framing is more, I just feel like resonant. And I mean, if you're not familiar with the Nagoya Protocol and you are a psychedelic entrepreneur or an entrepreneur in the sacred plant medicine space, whether it's indigenous or Western, it's good to become versed with what that protocol entails and what it outlines. And it really is a framework for what we call access and benefit sharing. So, and that was really the whole impetus towards launching Grow Medicine, was to create a platform that made it easy for people to donate and give back and share the benefits. Like, I'm less depressed. Hallelujah. I want to give back and share in this joy. And I think that there's a lot of versions of that, and so, I think in my own business, yes, I do give a percentage of what I make to other initiatives that I support. And I try to, send it in different directions. And then there are some projects that I am really dedicated to supporting right now. And so that's where, excess funds go towards, supporting those initiatives. And right now, primarily Colombia is where I'm focusing a lot of my philanthropic efforts. And I think we should, bring that effort to the table. So in addition to donation and access and benefit sharing, I also try to bring in the mindset of, access and to my programs and creating scholarships and sliding scale. And that's actually how my mother raised me. My mom was just such an incredible mom. And so was my dad. They were very philanthropic oriented, and they always said 10%, So if you have a full roster of clients, have a client who can afford it, who you're supporting, because that's the right thing to do. And that's just how they raised me. So I do try to apply that mindset. And there's so much more that I can do, and there's so many more ways that I am leaning into, doing the best that I can and educating people in the best way that I can, given my limited worldview. And I really appreciate, the programs that have been framed around supporting women in particular, because in the past year and a half, I've supported over 100 medicine women entrepreneurs to step into the space and share their voice and their feminine perspective and cultivate offerings. And that's just a huge passion of mine, in addition to supporting leaders across a lot of different fields, and who are working with medicines in leadership positions to help cultivate that intuitive sense of what heart-centered leadership is really about. And so I started with the frame around psychedelics and creative cognition and leadership development. And I do have an exciting program coming up that I'm going to be launching around October that I'm so excited about. And it's going to be about an 8-month-long mastermind that really focuses on this framework and working with medicines to help cultivate our thought leadership and our leadership and the refinement of ideas to inspire change. And for people who have a message that they're cultivating, that they want to refine, to reach people, to help inspire, systems-wide change on a much vaster level. So that is it in a nutshell. I know that's quite a lot to unpack, but thank you for asking.
No, it's amazing. And I really am excited to get to share you with our community, because I'm sure that there are a lot of people listening that are looking for that type of mentorship and support. And I think that your programs or your one-on-ones, there are a variety of different ways for people to work with you, are an incredible asset for people who are looking for this type of container and resources to continue cultivating their medicine and cultivating their gifts to the world. So I love it. I love the way that all that you do is focus on, being in service, helping people to achieve their potential. And in doing so, you're shining your light very, very bright, Laura. So I commend you, celebrate you. And I know that you have the last cohort of your message is your medicine coming up as well. So there's that. And I think you also have the one-on-ones. How can people get in touch with you? Is the best way just through your website?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that invitation. Yeah. My home base is my website, lauradon.co. And you can reach out to me. I have an email list that I don't even want to call a newsletter, because it's so much more than that to me. It's just really me sharing my heart. And I have over 10,000 people on my email list now. And I'm just so grateful that, the community is growing and people are resonating with this message. And I have a lot of free guides, from integration guides to, how to have a safe journey at home, to free 8-day microdosing course. So on my website, if you go to the free downloads, you'll be able to see all of those awesome offerings that I've put really a lot of dedication and love into. And and if you want to stay tuned, I don't know the dates yet for the last cohort, but I'm only going to run one more cohort like this. And then, I'll probably turn it into an evergreen if people want to tune in at some future date. But if you'd love to be in touch, that's the best way. My podcast, the Psychedelic Leadership Podcast, and then my Instagram is at LiveFreeLauraD, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Laura. It's been a joy and a pleasure to connect with you. Thank you for all of your beautiful insights and for bringing your medicine to this podcast and to the Four Visions community.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariah. I really appreciate it.
From everyone at the Four Visions Market family, we would like to thank you for listening to our podcast. We really hope that you've enjoyed the conversation and gained many new insights on plant medicines, ancestral wisdom, and much more. Please remember to visit our website at www.fourvisionsmarket.com for more resources and information on plant medicine and spiritual tools. And please don't forget to follow us across social media for regular updates on upcoming episodes. We are grateful for your support and look forward to continuing this path with you all. Until next time, take care, stay present, and stay connected.